Good morning to all present, both in person and online. It is my pleasure to invite you all on behalf of the organizing committee of IConArts 2023 to the inaugural session of the International Conference on Humanities and Social Sciences of the Faculty of Arts, University of Colombo. The 9th iteration of IConArts in 2023 focuses on research excellence through interdisciplinary approaches in humanities and social sciences and seeks to encourage transformative scholarship and innovative solutions for the future. To formally begin today's proceedings, let me invite you all to rise to your feet for the national anthem. Thank you. I now invite co-chairperson of IConArts 2023, Dr. Shashitangani Veeravansa, to deliver the welcome address. Ayubowan, Vanakkam, good morning, Venerable Theros, and all other
religious dignitaries. The chief guest for the inauguration are Vice Chancellor, Senior Professor H.D. Karunaratne, keynote speaker Emeritus Professor Kalinga Tuda Silva from the University of Peradeniya, who was to be here to deliver the speech, but unfortunately he had to undergo a surgical process yesterday due to a minor accident. So the doctors have advised him not to make the trip. However, he will be joining us via Zoom. Guest of honor, Professor Mick Moore from the University of Sussex, UK. The Dean of the Faculty of Arts and the Dean of the other faculties, heads of department and all other academics, the Registrar, Bursa and other staff members, members of the GIZ who kindly agreed to sponsor the meals for the day, representatives of our sponsor, the Social Science Association, all other distinguished invitees in attendance, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of my co-chair, Mr. Krishan Sirivadana, and the rest of the conference committee, it is my distinct honor and privilege to welcome each and every one of you to the IConArts 2023 Annual International Research Conference of Humanities and Social Sciences organized by the Faculty of Arts, the University of Colombo, Sri Lanka. This year, conference is a special celebration of the power of academic collaboration across the spectrum of humanities and social sciences in our efforts to understand the world better. Therefore, the faculty set the theme to be research excellence through interdisciplinary approach in humanities and social sciences. After a lengthy discussion, we settled with the conference tracks that you see on the screen now, which we felt would be an efficient way to encourage the researchers to send abstracts and extended abstracts of their studies that would truly be interdisciplinary in nature. We received about 80 such submissions, with 10 of them from other countries. After a rigorous selection and double-blind review process, we ended up with 45 abstracts to be presented in the technical sessions today. I must thank all the authors who submitted abstracts, and congratulations to the ones who are here today to do their presentations. My heartfelt gratitude goes to all the reviewers from the university and also from all the other universities and institutes for their generous contribution to the review process. I sincerely hope that all of you can participate in some of these sessions according to your field of study or interest and engage in fruitful discussions on these interdisciplinary topics. As you see at the end of the schedule of the technical sessions, we have a special treat for you. A 1-hour special discussion session on the theme, reconciliation, a prerequisite for progress or a remnant from the past, applying an interdisciplinary lens to the reconciliation debate. I do not think you will disagree with me if I say that no amount of interdisciplinary teaching, learning, and research would do any good to humanity if we do not know how to live in harmony with each other, irrespective of our place of birth, the skin color, caste, ethnicity, race, religion, or the language we speak. Though we often talk about interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary studies or research, we usually do not think about why we have to specifically focus on such concepts now. In our daily lives, we do not and cannot solve problems or achieve the goals we set for ourselves just by concentrating on one discipline at a time. The nature, which includes human beings, is inter, intra, trans, and multidisciplinary anyway. Philosophers thousands of years ago were thinking multidisciplinary thoughts. Da Vinci was known by most people as a gifted painter, but he was a mathematician, a chemist, a physicist, and a philosopher. Most of you probably have heard of Bertrand Russell as a 20th century British mathematician, but his work spanned a wide range of disciplines, including, of course, mathematics, philosophy, logic, politics, and education. He won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1950. If I take my own field of interest, economics, as you all know, there are a lot of mathematicians and sociologists who have even won the Nobel Prize for economics. One might say, yeah, they are all dead and gone now. That was then, and this is now. And we are into a single disciplinary mode of living in the 21st century. A present-day example for a multidisciplinarian is Professor Noam Chomsky, who is primarily known for his work in linguistics and cognitive sciences. But his influence extends beyond linguistics and areas such as philosophy, politics, and international relations. We are where we are today, talking about intra, multi, and transdisciplinary research because we have deviated from that kind of holistic thinking. And we have perhaps felt that it was easier to solve problems if we can get the problem corner to one discipline. Then, for a few hundred years, we have been seeing every problem as a nail since the only tool we had was a hammer. Looking at what is happening around the world today, I do not think that anyone would be willing to put their money on single disciplinary mode of thinking. If I admit that change is needed, then there is no better place than universities and other institutes of higher teaching learning to be that change first. What we have to understand is that the main purpose of academics and hence of universities is to make life easier for people to live, not only in physical plane, but also in emotional and mental planes. I am sure most, if not all of you, have been hearing these buzzwords, interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, and multidisciplinary lately, especially related to this type of conferences. I sincerely hope that this is not just another one of those after which we get back to our linear thinking and life as usual, trying to solve every problem with the hammer. If we can at least motivate you to start detaching yourself from single disciplinary mode where one usually feels that one's own discipline is superior to the rest, or one does not need to open one's receptors to other frequencies, even we certainly can be happy about the outcome of our efforts of bringing you all together for such an intellectual discussion today. I firmly believe that the day we, as humans, come to understand the value of holistic thinking, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, and transdisciplinary approach to solving problems is the day we start seeing the power of living in harmony with fellow human beings, irrespective of their race, religion, skin color, caste, place of birth, the language they speak. I must say that when we achieve such an understanding, that will probably put organizations like our event partners, whose business is to teach others how to live in harmony, out of business. But I'm sure they don't mind, since they too will feel then that they have achieved their ultimate goal of eradicating single disciplinary thinking and establishing social cohesion and peace on earth. Thank you, and please enjoy the rest of the program and the technical sessions.
Thank you, Dr. Veeravansa, for that comprehensive overview of the thought process behind IConArts 2023. Let me next invite the Dean of the Faculty of Arts, Senior Professor Lasantha Manavadu, to address the gathering.
Good morning to all of you. The Vice Chancellor, University of Colombo, Senior Professor H.T. Karunaratne, Deans of the faculties, heads of the departments and unit coordinators, emeritus professors, senior professors and professors of the Faculty of Arts and the University of Colombo, distinguished invitees, Commissioner and the members of the GIZ, academic members of the faculty and the University of Colombo, keynote speaker today, Professor Kalinga Tuda Silva, our guest of honor, Professor Mick Mao, and members of the organizing committee, administrative staff of the University of Colombo, the members from the library, and paper presenters, colleagues, friends. Once again, good morning. As you are all aware of this today, this is our 9th international conference organized by the Faculty of Arts. Very first time we organized this international conference, IConArts, during the former Dean, Faculty of Arts, Professor Atula Ranasinghe, that is in 2015. This year, our conference theme is Research Excellence through Interdisciplinary Approaches in Humanities and Social Sciences. It is no doubt that this is a timely theme for this year's Faculty Annual Conference. We started the commencing of this annual conference, that is annual conference, as a key calendar event of the faculty from year 2006. We have completed 8 annual international conferences by now, even during the pandemic situation period and much difficult time. We could held IConArts 2021 and 2022. We inaugurating this year IConArts 2023 while the country's most severe economic crisis is ongoing. As an academic, I believe that our profession is much different from other professions. I define our duties in 3 folds. The first part is teaching. We serve to deliver our knowledge mainly in the form of teaching for both undergraduate and postgraduate students. School teachers also teach their students. But are we doing the same thing as what school teachers are doing? This is a question we should ask ourselves. Research is the second part of our duties. Here we are all conducting research at different scales. Some are doing very high-level research on explanatory and innovations. Some do policy-level research, and some research are those among internationally interdisciplinary accepted research. In this nature, we encourage in multiple ways of research. It is also important to see how we produce knowledge through our research. Here, we became knowledge producers by conducting research and publishing them. Being a university lecturer means that we are compelled to teach by experiencing research. In other words, the knowledge gained through our research. I go back to my previous question about the role of school teachers and the university teachers, difference between the school teachers and the university staff. What do school teachers teach? They teach facts and information available in the textbooks. University academics are supposed to teach knowledge that they produce through their research. That is one of the main difference between school teachers and the university staff. As a school teachers, they produce their lecture notes, classroom notes, through what they have gained through textbooks. Third part of our duty is dissemination of knowledge. In this task, we are obliged to disseminate knowledge produced by yourself. We utilize multiple platforms for dissemination knowledge, such as publishing books, research papers, conducting public lectures, participating at conference, etc. The IConArts 2023 that we are inaugurating today is faculty's largest platform of dissemination knowledge among ourselves. Not only among colleagues and students, but also various other interested academic participating national and international arena. This is why conferences of this nature are extremely useful to university system. The conferences are open platform for disseminate and facilitate the opportunity for academics and researchers to present their knowledge, what they have gained through their research. I am confident that IConArts 2023 will be a very useful engagement to policymakers and researchers who are pertaining their different parts of the world. This conference certainly an ideal platform for discuss and debating research outcomes. Finally, I would like to thank everyone supported us to make this event a success, while also congratulating and wishing the presenters all very best in their future endeavors. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Manavadu, both for your support of and advice on the organizing of IConArts 2023, as well as that timely reminder of just how integral research is to life within academia. It is my pleasure to next invite the Vice Chancellor of the University of Colombo, Senior Professor H.D. Karunaratne, to deliver his address as the chief guest of this inaugural session.
Very good morning to all. Ayubowan, Wanakkam, Assalamu alaikum. Venerable Mahasangha, Senior Professor Lasantha Manavadu, Dean of the Faculty of Arts, and today's event guest of honor, Professor Mike Moore, a well-known economist and social scientist who has written on Sri Lanka as well. Delighted to see you today in our international conference. Deans, directors, heads of the department, acting registrar, Bursa, all senior professors, and academia, distinguished invitees to IConArts 2023. It gives me great pleasure and honor to address you in this very pleasant morning where the Faculty of Arts celebrating their research presentation as their main profession, lecturers, professors, and all researchers. I think I have to explain something on the University of Colombo because there are guests here. The University of Colombo has about 153 years of experience, and currently we have 42,000 learning partners and 880 academics. Nearly the Faculty of Arts has about 120 academics. And of course, the University of Colombo annually produce about 635 SCI journal articles by our academia. And annually we do about 21 international research conferences in par with the annual research conference of the University of Colombo. This year's annual research symposium of the University of Colombo had a very interesting theme, which is the research excellence and beyond. This part is very important because beyond is very important because we are in the next level of research now. The University of Colombo Academia has conducted many research, but final outcome of research, we need to link with the improvements of living standards of the people living in the Sri Lanka and other countries. So beyond means that whatever the research outcomes we produce, we need to go for policy making, product development, obtaining patent rights, linking with the business community, linking with the community, and producing more tangible things for general public. That is the meaning of the final outcome of research. So therefore, in a research conference, we may present papers and get credit for maybe quantitatively and qualitatively for our promotions. But the University of Colombo is now in a different stage. Out of these 635 SCI journal articles, almost 400 is coming from the Faculty of Medicine. 200 is coming from the Faculty of Science. Only 25% of SCI journal articles coming from all social science faculties. But I know that you may have different view. Only SCI journal articles will not be the research. We know that we have excellent professors like Professor J.B. Disanayake, who published more than 250 books in the Faculty of Arts. So there may be different ways you can proceed, but we need to understand all academia here, we are in a different platform of the research. It's not just presenting abstract in a conference. You have to take this abstract into a different level, not only publishing, but also making a very useful item to the nation, to the country. As we all are aware that we are suffering from economic crisis, political crisis, many crises today. So the answer lies with how we overcome with the innovative thinking. So innovative thinking arising with the research. So therefore I hope that this year the IConArts has selected the topic as, of course, a very important topic, the research excellence through interdisciplinary applications in humanities and social sciences. This is very important because now your faculty, of course it is my faculty also, I also got my master's degree from this faculty. So this faculty consists two main streams, the humanities and social sciences. So why we broad-base that extent to our research? Because there are no boundaries when you are doing research. Maybe academic disciplines, still I see some are trying to safeguard only their discipline and be within the discipline and don't like to go with other disciplines. But that era has gone. You have to rethink about the multidisciplinary way. So I think that is why this appropriate topic you have selected this year. So we need to go for multidisciplinary approaches and contributing to the general public knowledge, and the usefulness of our research must be increased. Of course, I should thank selecting Professor Mike Moore as your guest of honor and speaker today, because we know that he's coming from the Institute of Development Studies, University of Sussex, UK. And our, of course, the first Vice Chancellor, also of the University of Colombo, you can see his picture. He is Sir Ivor Jennings from British. So we have many links with the British universities. So therefore, it is great pleasure the British person who's working, even the Sri Lankan approaches also, you selected as a guest of honor today. So I hope that you will get a maximum benefit in the today's research conference. In a research conference, we need to recognize and congratulate for paper presenters, and they should show their actual research and should come with the arguments with the others. Then you can improve your research more into a next level in the research conference. So I'm not going to speak much. Thank you very much for inviting me as the Vice Chancellor. Thank you very much for conducting this IConArts 2023 in par with the annual research session of the University of Colombo. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Karunaratna, for your oversight of the university's research culture and for your own endeavors in this regard as the Vice Chancellor. I now invite the co-chairpersons of the conference to present the conference proceedings of IConArts 2023 to these persons. The Vice Chancellor, University of Colombo, Senior Professor H.D. Karunaratna. The Dean, Faculty of Arts, University of Colombo, Senior Professor Lasantha Manavadu. And the Guest of Honor, Professor Mick Moore. Thank you. The conference proceedings will also be available online shortly after the conference. It will be accessible on the website of the Faculty of Arts under the tab titled Faculty Research Symposia 2023. I now invite co-chairperson of IConArts 2023, Mr. Krishan Sirivardhana, to introduce our keynote speaker who will be joining us online this morning.
It is an immense honor for me to introduce the keynote speaker of the IConArts 2023, Emeritus Professor Kalinga Tudor Silva. Professor Tudor Silva's academic journey is a testament of dedication and scholarly achievements. He holds a bachelor's degree in sociology from the University of Peradeniya and earned his PhD in anthropology from the Monash University, Australia. His academic contribution has been acknowledged globally, marked by the prestigious Fulbright Senior Scholar Award and Commonwealth Scholar Award. Professor Silva's remarkable contributions to the Department of Sociology at the University of Peradeniya span over 4 decades, influencing the essence of the institution's academic legacy. His impact was transformative, serving as both the head of the Department of Sociology and the Dean of the Faculty of Arts. Beyond his exceptional tenure at the University of Peradeniya, Professor Silva's global academic engagements are noteworthy. His roles as a visiting professor at esteemed institutions such as Whittier College, Borden College, the University of Connecticut in the USA, and as a distinguished visiting professor of South Asian Studies at the University of Heidelberg, Germany, signifies his international academic eminence. Additionally, his role as a visiting research scholar at the Wellcome Trust Center for the History of Medicine, University College London, speaks volumes about his scholarly depth. As a prolific author, Professor Silva has significantly impacted various sociological dimensions, including social inequality, caste, ethnicity, nationalism, and the sociology of health and development in South Asia through his scholarly works. His publications, such as Decolonization, Development, and Disease, a social history of malaria in Sri Lanka, and his co-authorship in Checkpoint, Temple, Church, and Mosque, a collaborative ethnography of war and peace, published by Pluto Press, stand as notable contributions. Professor Silva's publication portfolio exceeds 150 books and journal articles, garnering widespread citation and acknowledgement among social scientists. Professor Silva's influence extends beyond academia. He has held pivotal roles in local and international development sectors, serving as the executive director of the International Center for Ethnic Studies and the Center for Poverty Analysis. He also served as the Secretary General of the Asia Pacific Network on Health and Social Sciences. His research on the impact of COVID-19 in Sri Lanka has earned global recognition. Analyzing issues of stigma, discrimination, and the role of religion in interventions, his work has provided invaluable insights into pandemic management and social responses. Professor Silva's commitment to understanding the economic crisis resulting from the pandemic showcases his dedication to addressing contemporary challenges. Currently serving as the chief editor of the Sri Lanka Journal of Social Sciences, published by the National Science Foundation of Sri Lanka, Professor Silva continues to inspire young scholars with his commitment to academia. He was conferred the title Professor Emeritus by the University of Peradeniya as a recognition to his academic excellence and contribution. Professor Silva's academic journey exemplifies the impact that a social scientist can have by working from an interdisciplinary perspective. His humanity, professionalism, and scholarly depth make him an exemplary figure in the academic realm. It is with immense pleasure that I invite Professor Kalinga Tuda Silva to deliver the keynote address. Thank you.
Good morning to all of you. Let me first try to retrieve my presentation. Okay. Good morning to all of you. I hope you can all hear me. First, let me thank the organizers of this event for inviting me to be a keynote speaker in this IConArt 2023 inaugural session. Let me thank the Vice Chancellor, the Dean, Dr. Sashi Veeravansa and Krishan Sirivardhana, particularly for contacting me in a difficult time. Let me also share with you my frustration at not being able to be there physically because of this misery, personal misery, which happened to me a couple of days ago as I was actually preparing for this particular presentation. So I hope you can see my you can see my screen. Can you see my screen? Can you see my screen?
Professor, we can see your screen. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Actually, my presentation is about overcoming the current crisis in Sri Lanka, why a holistic transdisciplinary approach is necessary to salvage and reshape the Sri Lankan welfare state. Actually, what I'm going to explore in this keynote speech is, what are the implications for the current economic crisis in Sri Lanka for the well-known Sri Lankan welfare state and how we can possibly get out of this crisis. A few suggestions. This is, of course, not a kind of conclusive presentation, but I thought this topic will be of interest to this group, considering the theme of this workshop, research excellence through interdisciplinary research. Of course, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary overlap quite a lot. What I want to focus on in this presentation is why a kind of transdisciplinary approach, a holistic approach, as was described by the previous presenters, is necessary to get out of this economic crisis. Let me describe the background a little bit. We are actually experiencing a sequence of disasters and dissent during the last 4 to 5 years, starting with the Easter Sunday attack in April 2019, pandemic in 2019 to 2022, the debt crisis that escalated in 2022, and then, of course, political process and the fallout during 2022 to 2023. So the key point I want to highlight, I think it's quite obvious. It's already a well-known fact that we need to understand this crisis as a kind of series of crises as closely interconnected. And I think the theme of this conference suits us better in trying to understand the interconnection among these different crises. We need to understand them as economic, social, political, legislative, managerial, and a lot more at the same time. So we need to actually look at how they are interconnected and why a kind of holistic approach is needed to address these different crises. So this is what I'm trying to push in this particular presentation. And also I must mention that tinkering with the problem by the state and international donors in reactive and one-dimensional terms can further complicate matters. So this is if you look at this issue from a narrow disciplinary angle and look at it as a purely economic financial problem, perhaps that will not help us very much in terms of getting out of this crisis. Let me quickly touch on the IMF relief package. Of course, very briefly, I'm not going to discuss it in great detail, but one of the key points that emerge is the donor-driven nature of this response to the crisis. Obviously, we needed the support of donors, particularly IMF, but in the process, we are also kind of restricted by the conditionalities imposed by this relief package. Lack of consultation with those of social sciences, development practitioners, and the public at large is very much evident in this process. We also know that, for instance, as university academics and professionals, we are very much affected by the high taxation imposed on professionals, which perhaps was necessary in terms of generating funds for the state. But it has also led to a series of other outcomes, which are in some ways harmful to the Sri Lankan welfare state. And this I will elaborate as I go on. And there is sort of cutting back on welfare, at least to some extent, and reactive responses rather than innovative strategic thinking rooted in the history and specificity of Sri Lanka, especially specificity of Sri Lanka as a welfare state, one of the long-established welfare states in the developing world, is something that we need to bear in mind in responding to the current crisis. In trying to understand the outcomes, we know we have reached we have achieved a degree of short-term economic stabilization. Obviously, we can see it in our day-to-day life. Supply of essential services restored, but a volatile market prevail in many sectors. Every day we hear of price increases and other changes. Market fluctuations are very visible in prices, interest rates, and taxes, and many other aspects. And also we know some development work is at a halt. Now, people living in Kandy like me particularly are very worried that the Central Expressway, which was the work on which was started, was stopped, and there is no sign of it being restarted in the near future. And also looking at the social political scenario in the country in the aftermath of the economic crisis, we can see that there's trust deficit in many aspects of life. Of course, this was quite evident in the Aragale protests, which broke out last year, and also escalating debt crisis. Another thing that we see very clearly is a tendency towards outmigration of skilled professionals, like in many fields, in engineering, medicine, and like accountancy. So this is also a sign of the trust deficit, because people don't feel that there's a secure future for them in the country. So one of the challenges before us is how to reverse that trend. There is also kind of capital outflows. I will not go into the data, but there has been many kind of investments moving out of Sri Lanka, particularly to our neighboring countries. And the pattern of FDI inflows have been quite inconsistent. And then I already mentioned volatility of prices and interest rates. So this captures the trust deficit that we are experiencing right now in our country. Actually, I'm going to talk primarily about the rise and fall of the Sri Lankan welfare state. I think many of you in social sciences and humanities know that Sri Lankan welfare state is quite old, at least started during 1930s. And it became a comprehensive welfare state in the early post-independence period, particularly after 1956 political change. Actually, I want to go back to the work of Laksiri Jayasuriya, who was the foundation professor of sociology and social welfare in University of Colombo way back in 1971. I was also one of his students for a short period. He was one of those people who argued that welfare state is very much, firstly, it has played a major role in improving our quality of life, as reflected in social indicators like life expectancy, literacy, and so on. So he coined the word welfareism to introduce this parameter. And in his book, Welfareism and Politics in Sri Lanka, published in 2000, he argued that welfareism is a kind of, it has strong support in social policy in Sri Lanka, especially as part of the Sri Lankan welfare state. But he also argued that it is very much part and parcel of the political culture in Sri Lanka. So people actually are wedded to welfareism, both politicians and the public at large. And of course, he was arguing that there are certain issues arising from this situation, but he highlighted the fact that Sri Lanka has greatly benefited in terms of quality of life from the welfare state policies pursued actually from the last phase of the British colonial rule. So he was trying to safeguard it particularly after the 1977 economic liberalization process. He was, of course, arguing that there was a kind of first wave of retreat of welfareism in Sri Lanka during and after 1977. And of course, there was a kind of debate about welfare and growth for a very long time in Sri Lanka, whether welfare should be pushed or growth should be pushed. But finally, many people felt that both welfare and growth are needed. And if we try to push one over the other, that it will actually produce many kind of disparities in the country. So what I'm going to argue in this keynote speech is that the post 2022 economic crisis, actually we are probably seeing what can be described as the second retreat of the welfare state. Welfare state is under assault from many sectors right now. So that is what I'm going to highlight. Of course, the welfare state has always been under threat in Sri Lanka, even before 1977. But one key point I want to highlight is that there is a kind of overall resilience of the Sri Lankan welfare state over time, in spite of all the problems it faced, including resource constraints it faced over time. It has, in some ways, bounced back up to now. So that is also something that we have to keep in mind in trying to understand the long-term sustainability of the Sri Lankan welfare state. Let me briefly touch on the fallout of ongoing state policies. As I mentioned, a new onslaught against the welfare state is happening right now. The impact of on the health sector and education sector are particularly important. These are sectors which are directly relevant to us, particularly in the university system, but also in the country at large. And it has served to destabilize social life and aggravate social unrest to a considerable extent. But one of my concerns is that there is no serious academic discussion about these issues in the country. So I hope IConArts 2023 will perhaps try to reverse this trend and have a kind of informed debate about the current state of the welfare state in Sri Lanka. Some people have argued that actually we are experiencing a kind of slow death of the welfare state in the current juncture. I'm not completely accepting this view, but I think there is a significant assault on the Sri Lankan welfare state. Professor Laksiri Jayasuriya, in his book, identified what he called 3 pillars of the Sri Lankan welfare state: health, education, and social services. So let me quickly review what is happening in each of these sectors in the aftermath of the crisis in Sri Lanka. Okay, so impact on health services is quite significant. Outmigration of health professionals. I was trying to get some data on this, but I wasn't able to get published data. But I can cite you some kind of anecdotal evidence I got. For instance, if you consider the anesthesia section in the Kandy Hospital, there should be about 60 people, 60 doctors, including specialists up to now. Actually, there were close to 60 prior to 2022, but that has declined to about 50 as of now. But more worryingly, some 15 to 20 young doctors in this unit are planning to leave. Some of them have already got clearance. So obviously there is a kind of trend towards increase out-migration of professionals, impacting on the health system, which obviously was identified as a main kind of, main component of the Sri Lankan welfare state. But even more than that, shortage of drugs and equipment is affecting. Often the patients, get treatment from the government hospitals, but often they get prescription from the doctors, and like they have to buy some of the medicines, more expensive medicines from outside. I can also cite a personal experience related to my hand injury. In trying to access health services, the first thing that came to my mind is Kandy Hospital, because it is nearer and we know many people who are working there. So when I inquired about it, and I told them I have an orthopedic problem, and they said, like they have systems in place, but they have one problem, because they can't issue X-ray reports, because they have an X-ray machine, but they don't have X-ray paper. So they can't issue X-ray reports. So they wanted me to go to a private hospital and get an X-ray done and get the report and come there. So obviously, this is a clear manifestation of how supply issues have affected the health system, and also this affects many different arenas, particularly health problems of elderly are very seriously affected. Those who are chronically ill, who are permanently dependent on medicines, they go through a lot of difficulties. Persons living with disabilities are also going through a lot of difficulties. And we see a lot of systemic inefficiencies. Even though we still feel that the government hospitals are the best, and in a time of crisis, perhaps that is the place to go. We do experience a lot of systemic inefficiencies in the system, which may actually encourage us to look for other options. Also, I have to mention that this is also one, perhaps a critical challenge for the welfare state: entrenched corruption in the system, particularly in procurement of medicines and other, like supplies. And then, I haven't been able to study this in much detail, but I understand that there is a kind of mafia-like operation, which controls many of these procurements, and which has led to inefficiencies and, of course, corruption in the system. The responses to these challenges have been many: deterioration in public trust, high and middle class people move into private sector. What happens to the poor is the biggest problem. How are they coping? What happens to them when they're in a crisis situation? A progressive decline of health indicators. For instance, about malnutrition, there are varied figures presented by various agencies. Now I have reproduced here the Central Bank report 2022, which shows that, if you look at the key indicators of malnutrition: underweight, stunting, wasting, overweight, they have, when you compare recent years, you see rising tendency of underweight, especially 2020, 2021, and 2023, stunting and also wasting has increased. And the only indicator which seems to have improved a little bit is overweight. Obviously, the economic crisis probably has a beneficial effect in terms of controlling overweight. There's also vastly different estimates of malnutrition in different sectors. Particularly, I have gone through some information about malnutrition issued by the Family Health Bureau, and there are many inconsistencies. And I feel perhaps as a part of this interdisciplinary trust that we want to push, we need joint scrutiny of the available data by medicine, agriculture, social scientists, and perhaps demographers. So that should be a very important step. And also we perhaps see a multiple impact of the economic crisis on malnutrition and possible impact of malnutrition on health and education outcomes, perhaps in a long-term basis. So we have to keep our eyes open to these tendencies. Education sector, I will, because of time constraints, I will not go into very much detail, but we see tendencies similar to what is happening in the health sector. Of course, problems in the education sector started long before the current crisis. Issue of private tuition, for instance, happened before. And then there was a kind of upsurge in Zoom education, particularly during the pandemic. That was the only way we could continue higher education and school education at that time. And that also created many problems, particularly people from the countryside. We are also experiencing out-migration of university teachers, lack of funds for equipment, consumables, and research, and also unregulated upsurge in private sector. And malpractices are not completely absent in the education sector, particularly first-year recruitments to privileged schools. In urban areas, we hear many stories of malpractices. So we need to not only salvage the welfare state, we also need to reform and in some ways rework the welfare state if we are to actually make it more sustainable. That's a point I will develop in more detail later. And also about poverty alleviation, what is happening now is this transition from Samurdhi program to Aswasuma. Samurdhi, of course, is a kind of mislabel for the program, because Samurdhi means prosperity, and Aswasuma is more like distress relief, okay? And perhaps that is more appropriate to the program. Anyway, what is anticipated in the Aswasuma program is better targeting. For instance, Samurdhi program served 1.7 million households. I must thank Professor Vasant Atukorala from the Department of Economics from University of Colombo for sharing this information. And he put this 1.7 million households was to be halved through Aswasuma program. And Aswasuma obviously was established with World Bank funds. But according to the data information available, the number of beneficiaries has actually increased from 1.7 to 2.5 million households as of now. So this also includes some of the beneficiaries. So targeting has actually not been successfully achieved. Obviously, Aswasuma plans to, basically make it a time-limited poverty alleviation program limited to 3 years. And how this will play out, we still need to look at. And there's very limited data on what is happening at the ground level. And now I was able to access this short report by the Center for Poverty Analysis, actually research in plantation, two upcountry plantations. There are, of course, it indicates that the number of beneficiaries or percentage of beneficiaries has decreased over this 1 year. Let's say from Samurdhi, the number of Samurdhi beneficiaries or percentage was about 27% in one estate and 15% in another estate, and that was down to 12% and 6% in the time this assessment was done. So obviously some targeting is happening, but the question is whether this is correct targeting, because it seems to be the plantation people who are going through many difficulties on their own are the ones who are kind of weeded out of some of the program. Let me quickly move to the final part of my presentation. The main pillars of Sri Lankan welfare state seems to be jettisoned, both education, health, and some of the program. But there's actually very limited public debate about what is happening, and a critical assessment of what is happening, and what could be done to improve the health. I will skip this. Now, in the final section, I also want to mention that the welfare state is obviously one of the leading employers of our graduates, whether they're in social sciences or other disciplines. So as university academics, actually, we have a kind of vested interest in safeguarding the welfare state, because if welfare state is removed, obviously our own products will have no they will have no employment. So that is important, and this is also reflected in like student bodies like Antare and trade unions such as GMOA and our own union FUTA. They are vehemently opposed to expansion of the private sector in education and health, which is understandable because of their anchorage in the welfare state. So in some ways, we can look at them as key stakeholders in the welfare state. But the point I want to highlight is that if we are to sustain the welfare state, actually we have to do much more in terms of making it user-friendly, and also trying to address issues like corruption in the welfare state. So I should also mention that there are other challenges faced by the social sciences in the current juncture: lack of informed public debate, informed by social science inputs, lack of engagement with policy, lack of interaction among different social science disciplines. This directly relates to the theme of this conference: clientelism. Clientelism meaning that people try to basically select their own supporters, or to
Deciding to move on with the next item on the list. Thanks to Professor Silva. I am pleased now to invite to the podium a representative from GIZ's SCOPE program, which partnered with the Faculty of Arts in sponsoring IConArts 2023. Ms. Sarani Vijayasinghe is an advisor to Sri Lanka Barometer, an initiative developed with the support of the SCOPE program implemented in Sri Lanka by GIZ. I warmly welcome Ms. Vijay Singha to address the gathering now.
Thank you. Senior Professor H.D. Karunaratne, Vice Chancellor, University of Colombo, Professor Kalinga Tilda Silva, who joined us online, Professor Mick Moore, Senior Professor Lasantha Manavadu, Dean of the Faculty of Arts, religious dignitaries, professors, lecturers, co-chairs of the symposium, the organizing committee, and ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to thank you on behalf of my organization for this wonderful opportunity to support IConArts 2023. An alumnus myself, I look at this opportunity with great pride, and I'm very excited for the sessions ahead, the learnings we'll take away, and the chance to listen to the work of some great academics. I'm speaking to you on behalf of GIZ's Strengthening Social Cohesion and Peace in Sri Lanka program, colloquially known as SCOPE. SCOPE is co-funded by the European Union and the German Federal Foreign Office and implemented by GIZ in partnership with the government of Sri Lanka. And one of the initiatives supported by SCOPE is the Sri Lanka Barometer that is implemented together with the Center for Poverty Analysis and the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation in South Africa. You may be wondering what the Sri Lanka Barometer is. Contrary to a question that I have been posed many times, it has little to do with the actual scientific instrument. Instead, the Sri Lanka Barometer is a research initiative that aims to track the progress of reconciliation in Sri Lanka. The Sri Lanka Barometer understands reconciliation as a multifaceted and multidimensional notion, which is exactly what intrigued the SLB team about this symposium, to look at contemporary socio-economic and political issues with an interdisciplinary approach. And this is entirely the objective of the Barometer, to get a holistic view of the progress of reconciliation in post-war Sri Lanka through the eyes of ordinary Sri Lankans. It looks at reconciliation from multiple dimensions. We call these dimensions domains. And these domains cover aspects such as socioeconomic, political, governance, justice and democracy, livelihoods, trust, etc. These domains were identified through expert discussion and public consultations around the country. And what we understood right at the grassroots level is that understanding and achieving social cohesion and reconciliation requires interdisciplinary approaches. I speak best with examples, and one such example is the issue of discrimination. Discrimination, at the heart of it, is a barrier to reconciliation. And discrimination, some may say, is firstly a social issue. But the Barometer has been able to peel back the onion a little further to reveal the many layers to it. Our latest findings showed that economic status is the main source of discrimination across the island, even before ethnicity or religion comes into play. An issue of this nature requires a multidisciplinary approach to developing solutions at the policy level. In a country recovering from a civil war and a severe economic crisis, the Barometer ensures that all voices around Sri Lanka are given a platform and are heard, so that we as Sri Lankans can move forward together. I think I'm in the right room to make it known that the data collected through our public opinion survey is readily available and accessible to you all to inform policy making and your work in different areas. Everyone here conducts research in a kaleidoscope of fields, be it economics related, ecological, sociological. And in the SLB side event today, we pose this question to you. How relevant are reconciliation and social cohesion to your area of work? This is exactly the kind of discussion we have organized for you at the end of all the technical sessions, as mentioned by Dr. Sashi. A discussion titled Reconciliation, a Prerequisite for Progress or Remnant from the Past, applying an interdisciplinary lens to the reconciliation debate. It will happen from 5:30 to 6:30 in room 302 at the Faculty of Arts. I think it will also address one of the main challenges highlighted by Professor Silva, the lack of public debate in social sciences. So we hope to see you all there. I wish you all a great rest of the day, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Vijay Singha. If you are interested in hearing further about the initiatives she was talking about just now, we will be hosting a special discussion, as mentioned before, focusing on the Sri Lanka Barometer initiative. Immediately following the technical sessions, that is at 5:30 p.m. At the Faculty of Arts. This will be held in room 302. So please do join us for this discussion if you have further interest in what was just shared with us. Let me also quickly place on record our warmest thanks to Professor Emeritus Kalinga Tudor Silva, who we lost unfortunately towards the conclusion of his address. We thank him very specially for being available online despite his own personal emergency, and we're very happy to have him enriching our forum today. I now invite co-chairperson of IConArts 2023, Dr. Shashitangani Veeravansa, to introduce to us the guest of honor who will address the gathering following this introduction.
Mick Moore is political economist specializing in applied research on issues of public policy and governance in poorer countries, above all taxation. He has extensive research and advisory experience in many countries in Africa, Latin America, and Asia, including Sri Lanka. Having led many inter-country advisory teams in Africa and Asia, he has more recently concentrated on the establishment and engagement of cross-country research networks and on contributing to high-level policy debates around issues of taxation in poor countries. His specialist skills include leading multidisciplinary international research teams and writing clearly for academic, policymaking, and more generalist audiences. His PhD in development studies is from University of Sussex in England, and the bachelor's degree in philosophy, politics, and economics is from Oxford. He has been serving as a professorial fellow at the Institute of Development Studies at the University of Sussex. He was the founding chief executive officer of the International Centre for Tax and Development, an international research consortium funded by the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, is a department of the Government of the United Kingdom, that is FCDO, Department for the International Development, DFID, the Government of Norway, and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He has been a visiting professor at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Berlin School of Economics and Law, University of Amsterdam, Vienna School of Economics and Business, Australian National University, and University of Aberdeen, Cambridge, and Oxford. Thank you very much, Professor Moore, for accepting our invitation and even adjusting your schedule to be here in person to deliver the speech. It is indeed a privilege to introduce you to the audience at the University of Colombo today. Please put your hands together to welcome Professor Moore to the podium. Professor Moore, the stage is all yours.
Good morning. I would like to thank the Honourable Vice-Chancellor, the organisers, and indeed the University of Colombo for inviting me today. It's a great pleasure, and it's particularly a great pleasure because this year is the 50th anniversary of the first time I came to Sri Lanka. I came first in the early 1970s. I think not many of you have much vivid adult memory of that time, but I would like to say something to connect a little bit to what Professor Tudor Silva was just talking about. At that point, we were in very serious economic crisis. This was the United Front government under Mrs. Sirimaro Bandaranaike, and at that point, imports of any kind were very difficult to obtain. But it is important to point out that was an authentic economic crisis. It was largely beyond the control of the government of Sri Lanka or anyone outside, and the essence of that crisis was that the prices of tea in international markets, Sri Lanka's main export then, had been going down for a very long time, and the prices of oil, which was Sri Lanka's main import, had shot up enormously after 1971. So there was a crisis which was largely beyond control. We are today, as Professor Silva said, in crisis. It's a very different kind of crisis. But in essence, this is not an authentic economic crisis. This is a politically created crisis. And that is a very big difference. And I want to eventually get to some of my views on why we are in this particularly politically created crisis. But I don't think that Sri Lanka is alone. I think some of the causes of this crisis are relatively general, and we find them in my own country, Britain. So my focus really over the next few minutes is to talk about some similarities between Sri Lanka and my own country. I can start, I think, when I first came in the early 1970s. I was interested in agriculture. I spent over a year living in a village in Galle district at that point, and saw that crisis at first hand. I mean, most people in that village had enough to eat, but there was a significant minority of people who didn't have enough to eat. It was, most people in that village were poor, they were relatively landless. A lot of the men were away working in casual labor in construction in Colombo. There were quite a lot of broken families, women trying to make do, doing, for example, casual labor on estates to try and feed families. And it was not, on the whole, or much of the, for many people in the village, this was not a happy time. Now, when I first came, I came from the development studies field, which at that time was probably imbued with a fairly tacit, not very explicit idea that somehow developed countries and underdeveloped or developing countries were somehow generically different. They were, this was chalk and cheese, two very different types of countries. And similarly, before I came to Sri Lanka, I'd spent some time in India, I'd read a lot of social anthropology. And when I went to villages, I was kind of looking for exotic people with strange habits and interesting customs and, people very different from my own. And one of the first comparisons I did between Britain and India was not conscious, it was forced on me. I very quickly discovered these people in my village were remarkably like me. I mean, they seemed to think like me. But not just me, but people in, I'd known back in Britain. So that was a first interesting lesson for me, which is just beware of intellectual assumptions. So that was one comparison I did between Sri Lanka and my own country, but the second comparison I want to talk about is that I began to realize, having spent a bit of time here and reading the history, that there were remarkable similarities in economic and political structures between Sri Lanka and Britain. And I'm summarizing them here briefly in this slide. But if we go back to 1950, I'm looking at history at that point, both countries had been wealthy, relative to their neighbors in around 1950. Both had previously enjoyed relatively healthy basic industrial activities, including export activities. In Britain, it was straightforward manufacturing. But in Sri Lanka, it was the plantation sector, which is basically industrialized. It happens to take place in rural areas, but plantation production was industrialized. You have very large numbers of people employed in a machine-like way, doing very similar things to their neighbors. And not only on the plantations, we had industrial kind of levels of activity in terms of transport, railways, the port, indeed many government services. So, and partly because of that, we had very large working classes, proletariats, if you want, and we had indigenous capitalist classes who were owning many of these facilities. And the politics had also broadly been very similar. We'd had a political spectrum which was very closely aligned on a sort of classic left-right fashion, with the more right-wing political parties being pro-market and pro-capitalist, and the left-wing political parties being based on trade unions and pro-workers' rights. We had enjoyed democracy. These were now and were then two of the oldest democracies in the world. We both had competent, relatively meritocratic public services. And we both, as Professor Tudor Silva alluded to, in both cases, governments were taxing quite a lot and were spending quite a lot of what they taxed on fairly universal public services. So these two countries had looked broadly similar. But even in the early 1970s, there were similarities that might not have been terribly obvious at first sight if you looked at the statistics, but they were quite similar. And the first one we just mentioned was there had been serious economic problems and economic decline. And in a sense, in both cases, the basic engine of economic growth, manufacturing in Britain, plantation sector in Sri Lanka, had kind of run out of steam. And the economies were, slowing down, and particularly slowing down relative to their neighbors. So there was a perception, both in Britain and in Sri Lanka, of relative economic decline. We have a serious problem. Something needs to be done about this. And something was done about this in broadly similar ways. Happened first in Sri Lanka, 1977 general election, major change in politics, with a new government that embraced broadly all those ideas about economic liberalization and markets that many people had been promoting. In Britain, this didn't happen until 2 years later, in 1979, when Margaret Thatcher was elected, and her ideas about shifting to markets were, in essence, very similar to those here. And in the 1980s and onwards, both countries did shift to a new kind of economic trajectory, not necessarily always happily, but on the whole, relatively successfully. In the case of Britain, it was on the whole a shift to the growth of the financial sector, and the financial sector became the most dynamic and leading element of the British economy. In the Sri Lanka case, it was a shift to tourism, to the garment industry, and to remittances from people who were going to the Gulf and elsewhere. And in both cases, we had welfare spending cuts of various kinds. So there was a shift, and the shift was broadly similar. Now, there are many other things that are obviously very different, and I'm not going to go into enormous detail about, what was different and what was similar. But I do want to come now to recent years and make another comparison. And the essence of my comparison is very similar. And excuse me, I'll use some very simple words on this. We have had in both countries governments that have pursued stupid economic policies that have generated enormous costs for their economies. So I'm talking really of the period since about 2010, with little variations from one country to another. In the British case, one of those stupid policies was the policy of Brexit. It wasn't obviously just the government. I mean, this was a referendum, people voted for it, but I want to talk a little bit later about why they voted for it. And it's worth mentioning that most of them now regret it. If we had the referendum again, we would be back in the European Union, except the European Union doesn't want us, because they do not want people who can't make up their minds whether they want to be in the club or out of the club. But I think we can focus particularly on last year. Or at least last year in Sri Lanka started 2019. Late in 2019, there had been elections, the new government came to power, the new government introduced a budget, and they declared in the budget that, and it's fair to say they had actually put this in their manifesto, they declared in the budget that next year they were going to collect about 30% less taxes than they had in the previous year. Now, at that point, Sri Lanka having been a relatively high tax economy until about 1990, the tax ratio had gone down and down, and it was getting to a situation, not exactly of crisis, but it was really quite unusual for a country whose economy was growing so fast and became a middle income country to be collecting so little in taxes. So that was one issue, but the other and more immediate issue is that from about 2010, the government of Sri Lanka had started to borrow on international markets, which meant that it had to pay commercial rates of interest. And those commercial rates of interest are determined by many things, but one thing they are determined by is whether the people lending the money think that the government is going to be able to repay when repayments are due. It's a simple banker's decision, and when people are lending money to governments, the first thing they look at is how much they're collecting in tax revenue, because that's ultimately where the repayments come from. So when the government, which was quite deeply in debt, declared it was going to collect 30% less tax revenue in the next year compared to the previous year, the financial markets, international financial markets, reacted exactly as you would expect bankers to react. Regardless of what you think about international bankers, I mean, they're pretty rational people most of the time. And they began to say, well, we're not going to lend any more money to this government, or if we're going to lend money to this government, we're going to lend it at enhanced rates of interest. And a lot of this debt had to be continually rolled over. A lot of it was fairly short term. And that's what happens when you borrow on financial markets. You leave yourself quite vulnerable. And so quite quickly, the government of Sri Lanka got into a situation where it was getting indebted. And economists were looking at it and saying, you realize you're about to drive off a cliff. Because if you don't do something about this, you have more and more repayments due. And you cannot roll over this money, and you do not have the money to repay. And this happened for about 2 years. So we had a government here for about 2 years. People were saying, you're driving off a cliff. And the government said, no, it's fine. Don't worry, we'll find the money. We know how to do it. And there are several things they could have done. They could have immediately reversed the tax cuts and said, oh, sorry, we made a mistake. We didn't realize. Fine. Or they could have said, I don't think we can repay. We'll start to renegotiate now with the people to whom we owe money and hope to get a better deal. Or in the last resort, they could have just declared that they're not default. We can't repay early on. But instead, they carried on repaying and exhausting the treasury until the last moment. And, oh, we can't actually repay. Now, I don't like to be in a position of any foreigner who comes to Sri Lanka and looks at these things, likes to preach about how terrible things are. And I don't particularly want to be the foreign preacher about this. But I have to say, I do not know of any other set of economic policy decisions anywhere in the world for a very long period of time that were taken so contrary to fairly obvious economic advice. So, there is something odd to explain here. But Britain, sadly, is in a very similar situation. Not only did we have Brexit, but last year, about 5 months, I think, after April last year, when everything became interesting, the Ragalayer, etc., the Conservative Party, having just kicked out one Prime Minister because of his total incompetence and lying, chose another leader who declared that the secret of economic success, because the British economy wasn't doing terribly well, was to cut taxes. We'll just cut taxes and then business will invest and boom and everything will be fine. Well, the British government is also deeply indebted. And exactly the same logic that applied to Sri Lanka applied to Britain. So when this person, Liz Truss, became Prime Minister and then started cutting taxes, the markets reacted in exactly the same way. We luckily avoided disaster. For complex reasons I don't fully understand, we came very close to my personal pension fund, well, not my personal one, but the academics' pension fund going broke because of the implications of the government's economic policy decisions. But in essence, the two were the same. Now, there are many other things that are similar, but I think just some couple of facts which are important is this is not just economic policy management, but in both countries we have a long-term deterioration in the quality of the public service and the quality of public services. Now, in Britain, we happen to have particularly good data on this. There is what's called a public service tracker that looks at the quality of those things that government funds and looks at changes over time. And not only do we have deterioration, but we've had deterioration in some cases in the quality of public services, even where government funding has increased. And that's really worrying, because this is not just a matter of how much money, but there's something deeper going on there. And, well, I don't need to say very much about the public services in Sri Lanka, but I would mention, since also Professor Silva mentioned Aswesuma, I mean, the thing that strikes me is what a fiasco Aswesuma has been over the last couple of years, or actually last year, in effect. So there are quite a lot of similarities here in economic policy making, public services, and the public service itself. What is going on here? Well, let me try to give you my sense of what is underlying these two cases. And in both cases, I think the important thing is we're talking about old democracies. That's to say, countries which have had universal suffrage. Well, in Sri Lanka it was 1931, I think it was 1928 or 29 in Britain, but at pretty much the same time we got universal suffrage. And so we're talking nearly of 100 years, and I think there might be processes taking place in old, if you like, a certain tendency for democracies to get corrupted, which we're more likely to see in older democracies than many of the younger democracies. And of course, most countries, even in Western Europe, are in fact younger democracies, much younger than Sri Lanka. So here are some of the things we see. First is this decline in both countries in sort of left-right political alignment and party identification, and the growth of a whole lot of other forms of identification in politics, some of them kind of lifestyle sets of issues. And I might just mention briefly here another little bit of very recent British political activity, which I think is relevant to that. About 2 weeks ago, there was a very large march in London in support of peace in Palestine after the beginning of the conflict. This march was timed for the same day as Armistice Day. Armistice Day is a thing celebrated in Britain every year, and armistice is actually ceasefire. This is celebrating the ceasefire that brought an end to World War I. So here we are, we have a peace march that is calling for a ceasefire in Palestine at the same time as a very important, British politicians tell us, British ceremony to commemorate the ceasefire at the end of World War I. You may think, wonderful. Isn't it great, that we have these two things going on at the same time? The British Home Secretary, a politician, who is responsible for these things and the police, declared that this was a terrible thing. She pressured the police to ban the march on the grounds that it was a hate march. Now, where you get the hate from, I mean, very briefly, you can't understand this until you realize that, there's a lot of, are you pro-Israeli, are you pro-Palestine behind this, and if you're broadly pro-Israeli, you think a call for a ceasefire is somehow is a hate march. Not only did she pressure the police, and the police, bless them, said no, we have no legal grounds to ban this march. But not only did she pressure them, but she then accused the police, and this is someone who is responsible for the police. She accused the police of bias in favor of anyone but right-wing racist demonstrators. She said, police do not police demonstrations equally. Those people who are, she didn't call them right-wing white racists, but that's what they are. She used equivalent language, and she said, they get treated toughly, whereas other people who are, for example, demonstrating in terms of gay rights, gender rights, various other things, they get treated with kid gloves by the police. Now, this was an invitation to right-wing racists to go out on that day and attack the police, which is what they did. Now, the absurdity of a conservative politician, traditionally in favor of law and order, stirring up right-wing racists to attack the police is something that, it doesn't have the same bad consequences as Brexit or really messing up your international debts, but it's the same order of complete irrationality. Part of this, or at least that is a very aspect of what you could call performative political activity, which is political activity that's focused on mobilizing people's emotions, and not just mobilizing, but generating a lot of emotion, playing on people's fears, and essentially engaging people in political issues that are diversionary, in the sense they're not about the real material issues and who gets what and whether people are getting their aswesama or not, but they're about setting people against one another. And I think back to Karl Marx's famous phrase, religion is the opium of the people, well, I'm suggesting that increasingly in some countries, and including Sri Lanka and Britain, actually politics is the opium of the people. Politics is what keeps us engaged, but keeps our attention away from what really matters in politics. Now, there are other dimensions of what's going on here. Power holders who abuse their electoral mandate to override the rule of law, constitutional constraints, etc. I mean, I don't need to say anything about Sri Lanka. I just remind you that Boris Johnson, when he was Prime Minister, was having great difficulty getting the legislation for exiting Brexit through Parliament. So he decided to do something that has never been done in Britain, which is to prorogue Parliament, close Parliament down for a period of time, and just then, get an agreement. Now, this outraged people. Now, fortunately, we did have a Supreme Court who said, no, we might not have a written constitution, but that is against whatever constitution we have. But that is broadly similar to the kind of overruling of the rule of law and established ways of doing things that we see very much here. Government is certainly less and less willing and less able to recruit high-quality public service people. If I go back to my point earlier about the public services and spending on public services, I think an increasing amount, while the money might be there, a lot of it is actually spent on public services that are intended to generate political support for government rather than address fairly fundamental needs. And to use the phrase that Professor Silva used, there is clearly a growing problem of trust and distrust, in particular, in government. Now, quite what is going on here? Well, I don't have a total answer to this, but I'll just give you my hypotheses about what's going on. I think the normal instinct of politicians, once they are elected, is to basically not only to stay in power, but to try and use power and to try and overcome any constraints that are placed by law and constitution on power. So let's assume that's just what politicians do. They don't have to be particularly good or bad, that's what they want to do. And that's why we have constitutions. And that's why we have, rule of law, and we try to have autonomous, independent judiciaries and universities and many other institutions, is exactly to keep the hands of politicians off of these things. But over a period of time, and I see this both in Sri Lanka and Britain, politicians begin to override these constraints. In Sri Lanka, they'd done it just after I first arrived, 1972 constitution, in the name of development, and because we're in an economic crisis, Sirimavo Bandaranaike introduced the first constitution that gave major executive powers to the Prime Minister herself and a fairly small group of people around her. And that is what we have seen increasingly over time, that politicians who happen to be in power use their authority more and more to reduce those remaining constraints on their power. And so what we have is a politics that's increasingly focused just on winning elections. And that's what politicians are increasingly focused on. They just need to win the election. If you win the election and you come to power, then there are very few restrictions on what you do. And if you're going to win elections in those circumstances, and particularly if you don't want to make serious commitments to people, well, then you engage in these kind of performative politics that I talked about earlier. You find ways of getting people excited and agitated over things that fundamentally don't mean very much and set people against each other. And I think we're reaching a situation where certainly in Britain and Sri Lanka, politicians are if not our worst enemies, they are not our best friends by a very long way. And I'm going to conclude by saying I don't think this is inevitable. I think it can be reversed. I don't think it's easy. I'm not quite sure how we reverse it, but I think there are probably two important elements to reversing it. And one is just the traditional ideas about placing constraints on the power of those people who happen to be elected, which is restoring the autonomy of the judiciary, constitutional constraints on government, the rule of law, giving power back to Parliament and away from that small group of people who happen to be clustered around whoever is in power at that moment, giving autonomy back to universities and many other similar institutions. But I don't think that is quite enough, because we're probably going to have to live to some degree to learn to live in a world where we have quite a lot of inflammatory social media, which worsens all of this, which is becoming our main channel of political communication. And where without those kind of old politics of left-right, where politicians are going to be continuously looking for ways of finding an agenda and finding supporters and therefore polarizing populations. So I think the most promising thing I've heard about is the idea of citizen juries, which has been around a few years now. Citizen juries are essentially randomly selected, fairly small groups of people, a few dozen people, who are given by the government a mandate, given a few months or a few weeks a mandate, and said, we have this particularly difficult and potentially divisive kind of issue on which we need to reach a decision. Would you people please just sit down and tell us what we should do? And the interesting thing about citizen juries is that when ordinary people from across, the political and demographic and other spectrums sit down and they have time to talk to one another, it's amazing how close they get to agreement. They don't agree 100%, but when they're standing and shouting at each other in social media, they're that wide apart. When they sit together and talk in a calm way, they're that close together. So I think the general message is, if we can find ways of let's take down the political temperature and the political pressure, and find better ways and slower ways of making decisions, and we might possibly be a little bit better off in both of our countries in 20 years' time than we are, unfortunately, today. So I wish you very well for IConArts, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Moore, for your fascinating discussion of the twin trajectories, as it were, of Britain and Sri Lanka, with particular insights into the complex intersections between governance, policy, as well as public service. We are very thankful that we had you here this morning. No event is quite complete without tokens of appreciation to our guest speakers who have graced the event. And so I now invite the Vice Chancellor of the University of Colombo to present our guest of honor, Professor Moore, with a token of our appreciation. Thank you. Unfortunately, as our keynote speaker is unable to be with us, we will ensure that his token of appreciation reaches him safely in due course. To conclude this inaugural event, let me invite now the course secretary of IConArts 2023, Ms. Nadisha Jayatunga, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Ruth. The Vice Chancellor, University of Colombo, Senior Professor H.D. Karunaratne, the Dean, Faculty of Arts, Senior Professor Lasantha Manavadu, the keynote speaker, Professor Kalinga Tuda Silva, the guest of honor, Professor Mick Moore, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor and a pleasure for me as a co-secretary of this conference to be able to express my appreciation to everyone who has contributed to this event's success. First of all, let me thank the Vice Chancellor, University of Colombo, the Dean, Faculty of Arts for their guidance and encouragement. My heartfelt thanks and appreciation goes to keynote speaker, Professor Kalinga Tudor Silva, for sharing his knowledge and expertise as the keynote speaker. In addition to that, I would like to express my gratitude to Professor Mick Moore for delivering an insightful and informative address as the guest of honor. I would like to thank to the session chairs and the abstract reviewers for their invaluable contribution. The organizing committee, led by the conference co-chairs, Dr. Shashitangani Veeravansa and Mr. Krishan Sirivardhana, has been the driving force behind this process. I thank them all. To all the committee chairs and the members, I appreciate all the hard work you put into make this event a great success. Furthermore, I would like to express my gratitude to Ms. Nandula Pereira, with whom I share the responsibilities as a co-secretary of this conference. I wish to express my thanks to GIZ, SCOPE, and the Social Scientists Association for collaborating with us. Ms. Sachini Amrasekara and FOS Media assist the live coverage of the inauguration, and Sirasa TV, Hiru TV, and the Sri Lanka Rupavahini Corporation Sanghita program assisted in the pre-promotion and provide media coverage for this conference. I sincerely thank them all. Last but not least, let me thank all the academic support, non-academic staff who work tirelessly, both foreground and background, to make this event success. I sincerely apologize if any names have been missed. I hope you will find the proceedings of today to be both inspiring and enjoyable. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you all for joining us for the inaugural event of IConArts 2023. Let me delay you no further from the refreshments that await you on the ground floor of this building. Please partake freely of the refreshments, but please do make your way very fast to the Faculty of Arts, since we hope to start our technical sessions at sharp 11 a.m. Technical sessions will be held at the faculty boardroom, room 126, room 128, and room 302. There are ushers who will show you to your respective venues as soon as you choose which technical session you want to attend. Once again, thank you very much for joining us here. We hope on behalf of the organizing committee that you will have an enlightening and intellectually stimulating day ahead of you. Thank you.